The sun beat down on Arlington Stadium as thousands of baseball fans streamed through the gates, their faces lit with excitement for the Texas Rangers opening day. Among them walked Jake Mercer, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, his movements precise and calculating. Unlike the cheerful families around him, Jake wasn't there for the game. He had been tracking Chuck Norris for weeks, studying his schedule, learning his habits, waiting for the perfect moment. Jake touched the hidden knife strapped to his ankle, a habit from his years in special forces. The weight of it reassured him as he scanned the growing crowd. The enormous client who had wired him a substantial amount of money wanted Chuck Norris taught a lesson, and Jake had convinced himself he was the man for the job. After all, how dangerous could an 84-year-old martial arts actor really be? As he found his seat in the stands, Jake went over the plan again in his head. Chuck would throw the ceremonial first pitch, then head back through the private hallway where security was lightest. That's where Jake would make his move. Simple, quick, and then he'd disappear into the crowd before anyone realized what had happened. On the field, the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, introducing the day's special guest. The crowd erupted in cheers as Chuck Norris walked onto the field, waving his Texas Rangers cap to the fans. Even from a distance, there was something about how the man carried himself that gave Jake his first twinge of doubt. Chuck moved with the fluid grace of someone half his age, his eyes alert, taking in everything around him. Jake watched as Chuck shook hands with the team captain, exchanged a few words with the coach, and took his position on the pitcher's mound. With a smooth motion that spoke of years of discipline, Chuck threw a perfect strike across home plate. The stadium roared its approval. While the crowd's attention turned to the players taking the field, Jake slipped from his seat and made his way toward the service corridors. He flashed a fake staff badge to a distracted security guard and slipped into the restricted area. The concrete hallway was cool and dim after the bright sunshine of the stadium. Jake found a shadowy alcove near the exit Chuck would use and waited, his heart rate steady, his breathing controlled. He didn't have to wait long. The heavy door swung open, and Chuck Norris walked through alone, checking something on his phone. Jake stepped out, blocking the hallway. "Chuck Norris," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the empty corridor. "Someone wants to send you a message." Chuck looked up, his expression calm but alert. He pocketed his phone and studied Jake with eyes that had seen countless fights, both staged and real. "Son," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, "whatever you're planning, this isn't going to end well for you." Jake felt a flash of anger at being dismissed so easily. "I've been trained by the best," he said, pulling the knife from his ankle holster and falling into a fighting stance. "Your movies might have impressed people, but this is real life, old man." A small smile touched the corner of Chuck's mouth, not mocking but almost sad. "There's a difference between fighting for the camera and fighting for your life," he said quietly. "I've done both. Have you?" For the first time, doubt crept into Jake's mind. There was something in Chuck's stance, in the way he held himself, ready but relaxed, that spoke of decades of experience. But it was too late to back down now. His pride wouldn't let him. "Time's up, Norris," Jake sneered, trying to recapture his confidence. He took a step forward, the knife glinting under the fluorescent lights. Chuck sighed, almost like a teacher disappointed in a student who should know better. "Son, you have two choices," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had faced real danger throughout his life. "Walk away now, or learn a lesson you won't forget." The security cameras in the hallway silently recorded the tense standoff as Jake struggled with his decision. In the distance, the crowd roared as the game began, unaware of the drama unfolding beneath the stands. The hallway fell silent as Jake stood with his knife pointed at Chuck Norris. The only sounds were the distant cheers from the baseball game and the soft hum of the air conditioning. Jake's confidence wavered as he looked into Chuck's eyes. There was no fear there, only patience and something that looked like pity. "You don't understand who I am, do you?" Jake said, trying to sound threatening. "I've taken down men in war zones who would make your movie villains look like children." Chuck remained perfectly still, his hands relaxed at his sides. Years of martial arts had taught him that true strength comes from stillness. He studied Jake's stance, noting the slight tremor in his knife hand. "The people who hired you," Chuck said calmly, "they didn't tell you everything, did they? They didn't tell you I spent years training with the best fighters in Asia. They didn't tell you I served in the Air Force as a military police officer in Korea." Jake's eyes narrowed. "Talk all you want, old man. Your roundhouse kicks might look good on TV, but this is real life." A hint of a smile crossed Chuck's face. "Son, those kicks weren't just for show." Jake lunged forward suddenly, slashing with his knife in a move that would have caught most men off guard. But Chuck wasn't most men. He stepped aside with surprising speed, the blade missing him by inches. "Last chance to walk away," Chuck warned, his voice still level despite the attack. Jake didn't answer with words. Instead, he spun and attacked again, this time with a combination of strikes he'd learned in close-quarters combat training. The knife sliced through the air as he pressed forward, forcing Chuck to back up against the wall. Or so he thought. What happened next would later be described by the security guard watching on the monitors as like watching water flow around a rock. Chuck didn't retreat. He moved sideways, letting Jake's momentum carry him forward. In the same fluid motion, Chuck's hand clamped down on Jake's wrist, applying pressure to points that sent shooting pain up the mercenary's arm. The knife clattered to the floor. Jake wasn't done. He'd trained too long, fought too many battles to give up after losing his weapon. He swung his free hand in a punch aimed at Chuck's jaw, but it never connected. Chuck blocked it with his forearm, the impact making a sound like a bat hitting a ball. "You're good," Chuck admitted, still holding Jake's wrist. "But you're fighting for money." "I fought to survive." Jake broke free and backed up a few steps, reassessing the situation. The old man was better than he'd expected, much better. But Jake had faced tough opponents before. He circled slowly, looking for an opening, any weakness he could exploit. "Whatever they're paying you," Chuck said, "it's not worth what's about to happen." Something in his tone made Jake hesitate. There was no boasting there, just simple truth. For the first time, real doubt crept into Jake's mind. The stories about Chuck Norris, were they based on something real? Jake heard footsteps in the distance. Security would be coming soon. It was now or never. He feinted left, then threw himself right in a tackle that would have brought down a linebacker. Chuck moved like lightning. One moment he was standing in Jake's path, the next he had pivoted to the side. As Jake stumbled past, he felt Chuck's hand guide his momentum, making him spin further than he intended. Off balance and vulnerable, Jake couldn't defend himself as Chuck's leg rose in a perfect arc. Time seemed to slow down. Jake saw the boot coming toward his face, watched it with a strange sense of detachment, almost admiration. This was what a real roundhouse kick looked like up close. Not the exaggerated movements from TV, but something compact, efficient, and incredibly fast. Then time caught up with him. The impact sent Jake spinning backward, a burst of light exploding behind his eyes. He didn't even feel himself hit the floor. The last thing he remembered before darkness took him was the sight of Chuck Norris standing over him, not celebrating, not angry, but looking at him with something that might have been respect. "You fought well," Chuck said to the unconscious man. "But some lessons can only be taught one way." He knelt down, checked Jake's pulse, and placed him in the recovery position. Then he stood, straightened his jacket, and adjusted his signature hat, just as security rounded the corner. The baseball stadium buzzed with excitement as the game progressed, but beneath the stands, a very different scene was unfolding. Security guards rushed toward the hallway where Chuck Norris had just defended himself against Jake Mercer. The sound of their boots echoed off the concrete walls as they approached. Chuck knelt beside Jake, who was beginning to stir. The mercenary's eyes fluttered open, confusion written across his face as he tried to make sense of what had happened. His jaw throbbed with pain, and the world seemed to spin around him. "Take it slow," Chuck said, his voice firm but not unkind. "That was quite a fall you took." Jake tried to speak but winced as pain shot through his jaw. He reached up to touch his face and felt the swelling already starting. The memory of what had happened came flooding back, the lightning-fast pivot, the roundhouse kick he never saw coming until it was too late. "The security team is on their way," Chuck continued, staying close but giving Jake space. "They'll need to ask you some questions." Jake's hand moved instinctively toward his ankle, where his knife had been, but found nothing. His eyes darted around until he spotted the weapon lying several feet away, well out of reach. "Looking for this?" Chuck asked, nodding toward the knife. "I think it's better where it is for now, don't you?" Two security guards rounded the corner, hands on their tasers, ready for trouble. They froze at the sight of Chuck Norris calmly kneeling beside a man on the ground. "Mr. Norris, are you all right?" the taller guard asked, rushing forward. Chuck stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. "I'm fine," he said. "This young man might need medical attention, though." The guards looked down at Jake, who was now trying to sit up, holding his jaw. One of them spotted the knife on the floor and quickly secured it while the other called for backup and medical assistance. "What happened here?" the shorter guard asked, looking between Chuck and Jake with wide eyes. "This gentleman and I had a disagreement about personal space," Chuck said simply. He turned to Jake. "Would you like to tell them your side, or should I?" Jake glared up at Chuck, anger and humiliation burning in his eyes. But there was something else there too, a grudging respect. He'd underestimated the martial arts legend, and he paid the price. "He attacked me," Jake said finally, his words slightly slurred from his swelling jaw. "I thought he'd be easy prey. I was wrong." The guards exchanged glances. It wasn't every day someone admitted to attacking Chuck Norris. "Son," Chuck said, addressing Jake but loud enough for the guards to hear, "everyone makes mistakes. The real test is what you learn from them." More security personnel arrived, followed by a medic who immediately began examining Jake. The hallway was suddenly crowded with people, all staring at the scene with varying degrees of surprise and curiosity. The head of stadium security pushed through the crowd. "Mr. Norris, we're so sorry about this incident. We'll need to take your statement, and there will be police officers arriving soon." Chuck nodded. "Of course. But first," he turned back to Jake, who was now being helped to his feet by the medic. "I'd like to know who sent you. This doesn't seem like your own idea." Jake hesitated, weighing his options. The client had paid half up front, with the other half coming after the job was done. But now, with security all around and the prospect of criminal charges looming, that money seemed less important. "A man contacted me online," Jake admitted. "Said his name was Wilson. Claimed you ruined his career 20 years ago on a movie set. Paid me good money to rough you up, scare you a bit." Chuck's expression remained neutral, but a flicker of recognition passed through his eyes. "Thomas Wilson," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I haven't heard that name in years." The police arrived then, their uniforms adding another layer of authority to the already tense scene. As they began taking statements and securing the area, Chuck pulled one of the officers aside. "I'd like to press charges," Chuck said, "but I also want to talk to this young man before he's taken away. There's something about his training, his technique. He's too good to be wasting his skills like this." The officer nodded, respecting the martial arts legend's request. "5 minutes, Mr. Norris. That's all I can give you." Chuck walked back to Jake, who was now handcuffed and being read his rights. The mercenary looked up, expecting to see triumph or anger in the older man's face. Instead, he saw something unexpected: thoughtfulness. "You've got skills," Chuck said simply. "Military background, special forces training. You could be using those abilities for something better than this." Jake looked away, unwilling to meet Chuck's gaze. "It's not that simple," he muttered. "It never is," Chuck agreed. "But it's never too late to change your path either." The ambulance lights flashed against the stadium walls as the paramedics loaded Jake onto a stretcher. His jaw was already swollen, turning purple where Chuck's roundhouse kick had connected. The crowd gathered at the edges of the police tape, phones raised to capture the unexpected drama unfolding on opening day. Chuck stood to the side, answering questions from a police officer. His voice was calm and steady, just as it had been during the confrontation. He described the attack in simple terms, without embellishment or boasting. "He came at me with a knife," Chuck explained, pointing to the evidence bag containing Jake's weapon. "I defended myself using the minimum force necessary." The officer nodded, scribbling notes. "Minimum force," he repeated with a hint of a smile. "That kick looked like it had quite a bit of force behind it, Mr. Norris." Chuck shrugged, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "When you've been training as long as I have, some things become second nature." Nearby, a stadium security guard was excitedly describing what he'd seen on the security monitors to his colleagues. "It was just like in the movies, but faster, you know." The guy lunged, and then boom. Chuck just pivoted and that leg came up so fast you could barely see it. The small crowd of staff members leaned in, hungry for details. One of them, a younger guard, shook his head in disbelief. "Man, I thought all that stuff was fake, movie magic and camera tricks." "Nope," the first guard said, still wide-eyed. "The real deal. That roundhouse kick is no joke." Meanwhile, the paramedics had stabilized Jake and were preparing to transport him to the hospital. One of them approached Chuck, looking slightly starstruck despite her professional demeanor. "Mr. Norris, we're taking him to County General. The police will meet us there for further questioning. His jaw isn't broken, surprisingly, but he'll need x-rays to be sure." Chuck nodded and stepped closer to the stretcher. Jake's eyes were open now, clouded with pain but alert. Their gazes met, and for a moment, the chaos around them seemed to fade away. "You could have done worse," Jake said, his words slurred from the swelling. "You held back." Chuck moved closer so only Jake could hear him. "Fighting isn't about causing pain, it's about ending conflict. Remember that." Jake's expression hardened, but something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the first seed of understanding. The head of stadium security approached, looking harried. "Mr. Norris, there's press outside already. Word got out somehow. We can take you through the private exit if you prefer to avoid them." Chuck considered this for a moment, then shook his head. "No need. I'll answer their questions. Better than having them make up stories." As the paramedics wheeled Jake toward the ambulance, Chuck turned to the police officer. "I'd like to know who hired him. This feels personal." The officer nodded. "We'll investigate, sir. But between you and me, I think you handled this situation better than our entire department could have." Outside the stadium, a small crowd of reporters had gathered, alerted by social media posts from fans who had spotted the police cars and ambulance. Camera flashes lit up the evening as Chuck emerged, flanked by security personnel. A reporter thrust a microphone toward him. "Mr. Norris, can you tell us what happened in there? Witnesses are saying you took down an armed attacker." Chuck paused, choosing his words carefully. "There was an incident. A man made a poor decision and I had to defend myself. The police are handling it now." "Is it true you knocked him out with your famous roundhouse kick?" Another reporter called out. A small smile played at the corner of Chuck's mouth. "I used the skills I've spent a lifetime developing. Sometimes life imitates art." The crowd erupted with questions, but Chuck raised a hand, silencing them. "The important thing is that no one was seriously hurt. Not the fans who came to enjoy the game, not the players, not the staff. That's what matters." As he spoke, his phone buzzed in his pocket. The screen showed a message from an unlisted number. "Check your email. You'll want to know who sent him." Chuck's expression remained neutral, but his mind was racing. After decades in both Hollywood and martial arts, he'd made a few enemies. But who would go this far? Who would send a trained mercenary to attack him in public? The answer, he suspected, would open old wounds and lead to an even more dangerous confrontation. The fight with Jake wasn't the end of something, it was just the beginning. The news of Chuck Norris's hallway showdown spread through the stadium like wildfire. Fans who had come to watch baseball were now buzzing about the real-life action that had unfolded beneath the stands. By the time the seventh-inning stretch rolled around, nearly everyone in the packed stadium had heard some version of the story. "Did you get? Chuck Norris knocked out some guy who tried to attack him. I heard it was 3 guys with knives. My cousin works security. He said Chuck took the guy down with 1 kick." The rumors grew wilder with each retelling, but the core truth remained the same. The martial arts legend had defended himself just as effectively in real life as he did on screen. Fans began chanting his name between innings, much to the confusion of the players on the field. In the stadium's security office, Chuck sat quietly reviewing the security footage. The black and white video showed the confrontation from multiple angles, capturing the fluidity of his movements as he defended against Jake's attack. The stadium's head of security stood nearby, still shaking his head in amazement. 30 years on the job, and I've never seen anything like that, he admitted. That kick was, well, it was something else." Chuck nodded but said nothing. He was focused on the screen, watching the way Jake had moved. The Mercenary's technique was polished, professional. This wasn't some random troublemaker, this was someone with serious training. "Has he said anything else?" Chuck asked, rewinding the footage to watch the initial confrontation again. "Not much. The doctors gave him something for the pain. He's pretty out of it now, but stable. Police have officers at the hospital waiting to question him when he's coherent. Chuck's phone buzzed again. The same unlisted number. Check your email. This is bigger than you think. After excusing himself, Chuck found a quiet corner and opened his email. There, waiting in his inbox, was a message with no subject line. The body contained only a link to a private video. Chuck hesitated, then tapped the link. The video began to play, showing a dimly lit room where an older man sat facing the camera. His face was partially shadowed, but Chuck recognized him immediately. "Hello, Chuck," the man said, his voice rough with age, but still carrying the distinctive accent Chuck remembered. "Surprised to hear from me after all these years? You should be. Most people think I'm dead." The man leaned forward, allowing the light to catch his face. A long scar ran from his left eye down to his jaw. A scar that hadn't been there when Chuck knew him. "The mercenary was just a warning," the man continued. "A reminder that I haven't forgotten what happened in Hong Kong. 25 years is a long time to plan revenge, old friend." Chuck's expression remained neutral, but his grip on the phone tightened. Hong Kong, 2000. A movie that was never completed. A stunt gone wrong. A man left for dead in the South China Sea. The video ended abruptly, leaving Chuck staring at a blank screen. He slipped his phone back into his pocket and returned to the security office, his mind racing through possibilities. If the man in the video was who Chuck thought he was, then today's attack was just the beginning. Outside the stadium, news vans had begun to arrive. Local stations had picked up the story, and reporters were interviewing fans as they left the game. One teenager enthusiastically demonstrated his version of a roundhouse kick for the cameras, nearly falling over in the process. It was just like in the movies. An older fan told a reporter, his Rangers cap tipped back on his head. "Chuck Norris is the real deal." Social media was exploding with posts about the incident. The hashtag Chuck Norris Roundhouse was trending nationwide. Memes were already appearing, most featuring Chuck's famous kick with humorous captions. Back in the security office, Chuck made a decision. He turned to the head of security and held out his hand. "Thank you for your help today," he said. "I need to go now." The security chief shook his hand, looking concerned. "Is everything okay, Mr. Norris? The police might have more questions." Chuck nodded. "They know how to reach me. Right now, I need to follow up on something important." As he left through a private exit, avoiding the press gathered outside, Chuck made a phone call to an old friend, someone who had been with him in Hong Kong all those years ago, someone who would remember the man with the scar. "We need to talk," Chuck said when his friend answered. "He's back." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That's impossible," his friend finally replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "We both saw what happened. Nobody could have survived that fall." "Well, he did," Chuck said, climbing into his car. "And he just sent a mercenary to attack me at a baseball game." "What are you going to do?" Chuck started the engine and pulled away from the stadium, the distant cheers of the crowd fading behind him. "First, I'm going to find out who he's working with now. Then, I'm going to finish what we started 25 years ago." As he drove into the fading light, Chuck knew that the roundhouse kick that had floored Jake was just the opening move in a much larger fight, one that had been brewing for decades and would finally come to its conclusion. The police station hummed with activity as detectives pored over the security footage from the stadium. Jake sat in the interrogation room, an ice pack pressed against his swollen jaw. The pain medication had worn off, leaving him clear-headed but uncomfortable. Across the table, two detectives watched him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. "Let's go through this one more time," the older detective said, tapping his pen against a notepad. "You were hired to do what exactly?" Jake shifted in his seat, wincing as pain shot through his jaw. "Like I told you already, I was hired to send a message. Rough him up a little, scare him. Nothing permanent." "And you thought you could take on Chuck Norris?" the younger detective asked, not bothering to hide his disbelief. "The man who's been training in martial arts since before you were born." Jake glared at him. "I've taken down targets in war zones that would make your hair turn white. I did my homework. He's 84 years old." "I thought," he trailed off, remembering the lightning-fast kick that had ended the confrontation. "I miscalculated." Outside the interrogation room, the police captain was speaking with the district attorney. The case was getting national attention, with footage of Jake being loaded into the ambulance playing on every news channel. Social media was exploding with reactions, most celebrating Chuck Norris and mocking Jake's failed attempt. The charges are straightforward, the DA was saying. Assault with a deadly weapon, possibly attempted murder depending on what else we learn about his employer. The captain nodded. We're trying to track down this Wilson character, but so far we've got nothing. The payment came through an offshore account, bounced around a few times before landing in our friend's bank. As they spoke, a uniformed officer approached, looking slightly flustered. Sir, Chuck Norris is here. He's asking to speak with the prisoner. The captain and DA exchanged surprised looks. That's unusual, the DA said finally. In the station's waiting area, Chuck sat patiently, his signature hat resting on his knee. Despite the events of the day, he looked composed, almost serene. When the captain approached, Chuck stood and extended his hand. Thanks for seeing me, he said. I know this isn't standard procedure. The captain shook his hand, unable to hide his admiration. Not much about today has been standard, Mr. Norris. What can we do for you? I'd like 5 minutes with the man who attacked me. The request hung in the air for a moment before the captain spoke. May I ask why? Chuck's expression remained calm, but his eyes held an intensity that the captain recognized from men who had seen real combat. There's more to this than a random attack. I need to know what he knows. After some discussion and a call to the DA, Chuck was led to the interrogation room. Jake looked up as the door opened, his eyes widening slightly at the sight of the martial arts legend. The detectives stepped outside, leaving the two men alone, though they watched through the one-way glass. They're watching us, Jake said, nodding toward the glass. Chuck took a seat across from him. I know. This won't take long. He studied Jake for a moment. Your technique is good. Military, right? Special forces. Jake's surprise showed briefly before his expression hardened again. 7 years. Force recon. Chuck nodded. I thought so. The way you moved, the precision of your attack. You're too skilled to be working as a hired thug. What happened? For a moment, Jake said nothing, just stared at Chuck with a mixture of resentment and grudging respect. Then something seemed to give way inside him. Got out 4 years ago. Couldn't adjust to civilian life. The quiet, it gets to you, you know? Found work with private security firms, then started taking jobs that paid better but weren't exactly legal. Chuck listened without judgment. He'd known men like Jake before, warriors who couldn't find their place in peacetime. The man who hired you, Chuck said finally. Did he tell you anything about why he wanted me attacked? Jake shook his head. Not much. Said you ruined him on a movie set years ago. Left him for dead. He showed me a scar on his face, said you gave it to him. Chuck's expression darkened slightly. That's not how it happened. Yeah, well, he's paying me a lot to believe his version. Jake paused, then added, half up front, half when the job was done. Guess I won't be seeing the second half now. What else did he tell you? Any plans beyond today? Jake hesitated, weighing his loyalty to his employer against his current situation. Nothing specific, but he has other people working for him. Better than me. This was just the beginning, he said. Something about the main event still to come. Outside the interrogation room, the detectives exchanged worried glances. So I'm not just dealing with you, Chuck said thoughtfully. No, Jake admitted. You're not. And the others, they won't underestimate you like I did. Chuck stood up, having learned what he needed to know. Thank you for your honesty. As he turned to leave, Jake called after him. Why are you here? Really? You could have just let the cops handle this. Chuck paused at the door. Because I've been where you are, made bad choices. Followed orders without asking questions. He looked back at Jake. It's never too late to choose a different path. With that, he left the room, leaving Jake to consider his words in silence. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the hospital room where Jake had been transferred after his night at the police station. His jaw was still swollen, but the pain had dulled to an ache. He stared out at the city skyline, thinking about the choices that had led him to this moment. The television in the corner played news footage of yesterday's events, though the sound was muted. A knock at the door pulled Jake from his thoughts. He turned, expecting to see a nurse or maybe a detective with more questions. Instead, there stood Chuck Norris, holding a small paper bag. "They said you could have visitors," Chuck said, stepping into the room. "Thought you might be hungry." Jake stared at him in disbelief. "You're visiting me? Why?" Chuck placed the bag on the bedside table and pulled up a chair. "Brought you some real food. Hospital stuff isn't great for healing." Jake eyed the bag suspiciously but said nothing. The silence stretched between them until Chuck finally spoke again. "Your former employer reached out to me directly after our talk yesterday." That got Jake's attention. What did he want? To gloat, mostly. To let me know that you were just the beginning. Chuck's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "He's planning something at the martial arts exhibition next week. Something big." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "And you're telling me this because I think you can help stop it." Jake laughed, then winced as pain shot through his jaw. "Help you? After you put me in here? After I tried to stab you? That kick must have rattled something loose in your head, old man." Chuck didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he leaned forward, his eyes steady. "You were a Force Recon Marine. That means something. You took an oath to protect people, not harm them." "That was a long time ago," Jake muttered, looking away. "Some oaths don't expire," Chuck replied. "The police found the rest of your payment. $10,000 to attack an unarmed 84-year-old man at a baseball game. Is that what your service taught you? Is that who you really are?" The words hit Jake harder than the roundhouse kick had. He'd been avoiding these questions since leaving the military, drowning them in adrenaline and paychecks. "Wilson isn't just after me," Chuck continued. "The exhibition will have hundreds of people there, including children from my Kickstart Kids Foundation. Whatever he's planning, innocent people could get hurt." Jake remained silent, but his expression had changed. The hardness was giving way to something else. Doubt, perhaps, or the first stirrings of conscience. "The DA is willing to consider a reduced sentence if you cooperate," Chuck added. "Help us stop whatever Wilson is planning." Jake looked back at the television, where footage of his unconscious body being loaded into an ambulance played on repeat. His 15 minutes of fame as the guy who was stupid enough to attack Chuck Norris. "Why trust me?" he asked finally. "I tried to stab you less than 24 hours ago." Chuck smiled slightly. "I'm a pretty good judge of character. Had to be in my line of work. You made a bad choice, but that doesn't make you a bad man." Jake considered this for a long moment, then reached for the paper bag. Inside was a sandwich from a local deli, roast beef with all the fixings. Despite himself, Jake felt a surge of gratitude. "If I help you," he said between careful bites, "what happens afterward?" "That depends on you," Chuck replied. "But I have connections with veteran support programs, including one that helps former Special Forces transition back to civilian life. Real work, helping others instead of hurting them." Jake put down the sandwich, suddenly not hungry. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple, it's hard work. But it's worth it." Chuck stood, preparing to leave. "Think about it. Let me know your decision by tomorrow." As Chuck reached the door, Jake called after him. "The kick, was it as good as the ones in your movies?" Chuck turned back with a small smile. "Better. The ones in the movies had to be slowed down so the camera could catch them." Despite everything, Jake laughed. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he made his decision. "I'll help you. Not for the reduced sentence, but because it's the right thing to do." Chuck nodded, not looking surprised. "Welcome back to the right side, Marine." 3 weeks later, the headline in the local paper read, "Chuck Norris and former attacker foil plot at martial arts exhibition." The story detailed how an elaborate revenge scheme had been thwarted, with Jake working alongside Chuck to identify and neutralize Wilson's hired men before they could carry out their plan. What the story didn't mention was what happened afterward, how Jake began working with the Kickstart Kids Foundation, teaching discipline and self-respect to at-risk youth. Or how Chuck had testified at Jake's sentencing, helping him receive probation instead of prison time. On a warm summer evening, Jake stood at the edge of a practice mat, watching a group of children practice their forms under Chuck's guidance. Their faces glowed with concentration and pride as the martial arts legend moved among them, offering gentle corrections and words of encouragement. "Never thought I'd end up here," Jake said as Chuck joined him during a water break. Life has a way of roundhouse kicking us onto the right path sometimes, Chuck replied with a wink. Jake touched his jaw, which had healed but still ached when the weather changed, a permanent reminder of the day he'd made the worst mistake of his life, which had somehow led to his redemption. Next time, Jake said with a grin, maybe just try talking first. Chuck's laughter echoed through the dojo, startling the children, who had rarely heard their serious instructor show such delight. Where would be the fun in that? He said, clapping Jake on the shoulder. Besides, every great story needs a memorable opening.